Hello and welcome to my PCG assessment video where the theme was fantasy or medieval, and so I decided to make a medieval fantasy underground mushroom cave. And as you can see, this is the area in which I created, and this is all done through procedural content generation, and I'm about to show you all the different techniques that I used to create this. Any assets that weren't created in Houdini, I took from fab.com. First of all, I wanted to create a procedural 3D model of a mushroom inside of Houdini. This mushroom will have textures attached to it and also have parameters that will be able to be affected inside of Unreal. The mushroom was created by creating two separate objects and then placing the cap on top of the stalk. And so I'll show you the cap first. Here you can see the nodes, including the groups for the different primitives that allow for the materials to be added to those different sections. First of all, the mushroom started off as just a circle, and then it gets swept into this mushroom shape using a Bezier curve. Then this jagged shape gets fused together to make it more smooth, and then you have your shape. From there, you can auto UV it, and then you can group those primitives to get the groups for assigning the materials. Next is the stalk, which is another circle, and then it's swept along a much longer Bezier curve to create this longer material. And then that is also fused together to create that smooth shape. Transform axis node and the bend 1 and 2 nodes, for example, these are connected to parameters outside of the object, and so they get a reference of that parameter and they allow you to apply a bend on the stalk or the shape or change the shape of the stalk itself, the width for example. And after that it's fused together, UV unwrapped, and then I get a group of that stalk and apply a material to it. From here, I copy 2 points, the cap, onto the stalk and merge them together. I get their normals and I export it. I have an export to FBX, but actually this particular model I exported as an HDA file so that I could parameterize it inside of Unreal. Here is an example of the different parameters attached to the object, changing the shape of the mushroom. For example, the stalk angle can change based on this 2D vector here. You can also change the cap size, the stalk length, and the stalk width as well. And this will allow, and does allow, for many different shapes of mushroom. To make a cave, I needed walls, and I wanted those walls to have a 3D texture that didn't just come from a material. So this is how I did it. First of all, I created a sphere that was elongated upwards. Then I created a grid and I applied noise to that. Using this wrangle, I took the noise and I applied it to a height, which then allowed me to stretch out the different circles. After that, I copied the circles to the grid, and so the different noise stretched out each circle to form a bumpy texture made up of many different circles. This was very inefficient, so I wanted to make a single mesh. To do that, I used the VDB from polygons node, and then I converted it back into polygons afterwards. The result of this was a bumpy single mesh. From there, I auto UV'd it, and then I exported it as an HDA. I wanted to change the parameters of mushrooms that I placed in my world procedurally, and to achieve that, I decided to use scriptable tools. Within my scriptable tool, I created an event which happens when you click onto the screen. And from this, I can cast a ray out of where the mouse is, and I can point it out of the camera during the editor time, and I can raycast the point that it touches onto the landscape.
From there, I can instantiate an asset, which is my mushroom, and then I wrap it and bind events to the cooking and the baking of that material, which is automatically done upon placement of that asset.
The first event that happens is post-instantiation, and that's the randomization of the mushroom parameters that were created inside of Houdini. This essentially gets those parameters and then it applies a random value to each one that sort of makes sense so that the mushroom doesn't look crazy. And here are the different parameters being set. Some of them they're set multiple times because the index is 0 or 1 because they're vectors.
Next, I wanted to apply materials to the mushrooms. Just in case I created a world, I wanted to keep that world, but I wanted to add uh, different mushrooms into that world manually, but still placing them procedurally. And so after the cook, I get the object and I save it into a parameter. After that, I take the name, essentially that's what I store, and after the bake, I apply more materials onto that. The result of this is that I have a mushroom that is completely randomized, and I have a mushroom that is also has its own different textures, which I can also randomize should I need it to.
Later, I can use the static meshes that are created from the bake of this scriptable tool in the placement of my flora procedurally in the PCG graph. I also created a tool which allows me to draw walls. This was mostly a scriptable tool which allowed me to develop a spline creation system, which was automatic for the world generation that I wanted to add as well. So I sent out the same raycast to a landscape, and essentially when I created that, I spawned a wall spline and I attached a static mesh to that, which was the rock wall which I had imported in from Houdini. So if it didn't exist, I created that. If it did exist, I rotated it towards the next point so that the spline wouldn't be curved from the start. And then essentially I extended the wall, which was a circular wall as well, going outwards for each click that I pressed. And here's the script which created the spline procedurally, deleting what was previously there and then creating a new spline with mesh attached to it. So it starts off by deleting what was previously there, and it draws the wall around the spline that has been created to create this circular wall. And here's the tool in action. So as you can see, I can click different points on a landscape and it will procedurally build out a wall. I didn't want to create my land by hand, however. I wanted to create it through a single click of a button. Set landscape function uh, does multiple things. First of all, it gets all BP underscore landscapes, which are actually an object that I used using the landscape patch plugin in order to change the height map of a landscape procedurally. So essentially it changes the position and rotation of a landscape which has noise attached to it, and then that changes the height, scale, min, max as well, and that applies a different height. I also call the draw spline function, which is also within the wall spline blueprint, and that actually draws the mesh of the wall procedurally instead of having to do that by hand like I did while I was developing the tool. Essentially, it creates a circle
Around the map, and then it randomizes the points on that circle.
After that, I changed the position and rotation of the landscape randomly so that I can change the positions of the textures onto that landscape
which the PCG graph uses to place flora, and that shows that the PCG graph is working correctly.
And here are some generations or some examples of generations
Of the world using a single click. My landscape had 3 materials painted onto it, and I wanted different fauna and flora to spawn onto the different textures that I had created.
Each material that I blended together was a auto material which changed from one texture to stone based on the normals of a position on the landscape. And then I blend those materials together to create an auto material, and then I pass those into a runtime virtual texture.
The reason why I put it into a runtime virtual texture instead of the normal um, output is because I wanted to print other textures onto that landscape based on the position of different objects. The implementation of that was that the stalks of the mushrooms would also print that material onto the landscape as well. Here you can see that the stalk goes into the mesh procedurally and automatically. This was not my original intention. I actually wanted to create a road, but I had a really hard time making that look really nice because it would go through the different landscape layers, but I was able to find another implementation which I think works quite nicely. Here you can see that in my PCG graph I have a static mesh spawner and it's printing to the runtime virtual texture. This is the road that I tried to implement, and I have to say it doesn't look really good, but I left it in the video to show what I was intending to create, I suppose. Here you can see that if I rotate the object, then it changes the landscape.
In order to create the mushrooms and place the flora that I had created, I used a PCG graph. Here I get a surface sample and I project it onto my landscape, and I get the material, the different materials that I had painted onto the landscape through the layer blend to filter out the different positions
where I should place different kinds of flora. Inside of each of these filters, I decrease the density of those floras, and I make sure that the plants don't spawn in places they shouldn't, like um, steep hills. And then I place a static mesh spawner, which places different static meshes, and these are the meshes that I had generated using the mushroom tool from before.
Different materials painted onto the landscape spawn different static meshes in different variations. So this is how I generate my little biomes.
And here's a fly through of the area. As you can see, there's a spike here that doesn't have anything growing on it, and the different locations have different plants inside of them. Big mushrooms, small mushrooms are also spawning on the mossy stone. There's no mushrooms in the swampy area, and then there's big mushrooms, except for mushrooms on the cliff sides in the swampy area. And there's also big mushrooms and grass on the grassy area. As you can see, as the landscape rotates, the position of the materials changes, and so does the position of different flora.